Hey guys, I had posted this earlier today. I had posted my dollar yen long that I've been holding for the last month or so. It's about a 550 pip run, and I was comfortable where we were at in taking my position off. I didn't want to give any of that 550 pips back, um, but I figured I'd take a little bit of time and kind of expound upon the chart that I posted earlier and just explain a little bit as to why um, why I was in the trade, what caused me to enter, how I looked at the chart ahead of time, and really what gave me the confidence to exit the trade where I did. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and start to plot out some support and resistance, just real basic, nothing drastic, and just give myself a little bit of boundaries in terms of where the chart was sitting around the time that I decided to enter. Excuse me, sorry, I'm not good at narrating while doing things, so bear with me here. Um, and then I'm going to break the chart into this little sliver right here. I say little sliver, it's a couple of years worth. Um, but why I wanted to do that was just to start to run through um, the thought process behind this trade, and in particular this little range that we're in. So you can see that we're sitting within this little zone, right? There's lots of ways to find a trend here. I was looking towards this high, which is the last little test before we just took off to the downside. So gave myself that upper trend line. Um, After we broke these fairly significant levels, retested, and then came up and finally started to dive back down. This was the um, last test of these levels again before that huge downward spiral, and we get that big sell-off triggered by the one, two, three, fourth tap of that 78.6. So that fourth tap of the 78.6, kind of retesting that strong support or strong resistance. That's where I initiated that downward momentum and starting to capitalize on that downward momentum. And it's been retested significantly. Let's see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight times on the daily, and probably a bunch of times on the smaller time frames from within. Um, so you start to look at that as a magnet, especially when we drift a little further away and we start to formulate a little bit of a clean fib structure. So if you take this run down, this overall run, you can see that the first test of that trend line, and that trend line wouldn't have been there at that point in time. That first test is right at the 78.6. So pretty clean fib sequence to start. Then you take that 78.6 and you look at the run down, and you could see that what held was the 61.8 and that resistance. And the 61.8 held until right here where we pulled away from that trend line a little bit, and kind of completed our squeeze. So if you look here, we've got a little bit of a squeeze, and that 61.8 was kind of the trigger to initiate that squeeze shut. So you've got another really clean fib sequence, and then to come out of that last test of the 61.8 that initiated the squeeze, you get a 78.6 test right at the trend line again. Eventually, we break through and start to pull itself. But really, what I was trying to get at was fib structure's holding. Fib structure is kind of initiating this little rundown here, and keeping that strength, keeping that clean chart structure. So what I was looking for was the last push up before we started to really create a little bit of a range. So you can see we've got that low right there, tested again, found an anchor, and then this low right here, that was tested pretty well. Right kind of where I entered, but that wasn't really the sole purpose for entering. What I was looking for is the last break above this level here and price just taking off. So you can see that the last little test below this strong level here led to this move. And then the 78.6, if you can see that, held perfectly right there. So that to me initiated a real strong volume spike and again, just kind of holding fib structure in place. So you look to the upside. Let's get rid of all the stuff in the middle because as we came down, you can see the 61.8 held. But the 61.8 was the only one that held a couple of times. So the 50 doesn't matter. But I knew that fib structure was still strong. So let's pull those away and give ourselves the green light on the 78.6. Let's clean up a little bit here. And so you look at this and you give yourself that 78.6 right at the bottom of that zone, being right there. And if you look at kind of what initiated this large run up, that 78.6, I'm not going to keep this on my chart just because it becomes a little bit too much, but that 78.6 initiates this massive demand zone, right? So price just takes off out of that. Maybe I'll darken it a little bit. So that's a demand zone, but we've got, now it's darkened. So it stands out a little bit better. So now we're starting to build some context around that area for an entry. And if you look at what's happened to that area in particular over the course of these last these last little pushes down, well, you get pretty proportional lower lows to formulate that that test right there and give a nice cross section. And then if you look at your low to low fib, you get your 23.6 completion right at that 78.6. So right here, this area just becomes very enticing for a long entry. Now, if you don't understand the low to low fib, I don't expect you to. That's something that that I talk about in the Forex structure course pretty significantly, but it's something I use a lot. So especially when it goes into things like this where you're measuring volume and you're starting to push big areas. And just for additional confirmation, you can see that we get a front run of that 78.6 by like probably about three micro pips, maybe 3 pips. I don't know. It's really, really small. But we tag that negative 23.6 and we front run it by almost by a fraction less than that initial 78.6 front run. So just additional confluence on a traditional swing fib. So now that we've made our entry, right, and I entered on the 4-hour chart, because if you look at the 4-hour structure, it's very, sorry, computer's yelling at me. It's very clean, right? So I entered on, I think, the middle test right here. So we came down, tested, showed some bulls, tested, and then I have my stop loss down below this 104.5 level, right? Then we came out of it fairly strong, and from there it was just pure trade management, right? It was really simple to manage this because the trend just held so well. Sorry, let me find the true low. Right, the trend just held so well over the last couple of months, and I could probably have held for a high, for the test right here. But what I was looking at this morning when I decided to take my position off was I really didn't want to give anything back. So I was looking at this little zone right here. And if you look at, again, we're going to go back to the high to high, low to low stuff. If you look at your high to high and just the overall last little bit of resistance right in the middle of that zone, it's all kind of in this area. And I wasn't really ready to risk a significant runoff from that level. I wanted to keep my profits. I didn't want to risk anything coming out of that zone. So you see, we get the perfect 50% retracement. I was going to be cautious with my exit, and I took it off right at that negative 23.6 just because of how perfect it tags that 50 off the high to high. So if anything, I was preparing myself for an initial bear rush down. Now again, there's structure up to the upside, right, kind of where we tag these levels. So there's a good chance I could have held and held for this as an exit, but instead traded this one a little bit more cautiously after having managed it for a month. Did not want to give anything back. So this was my exit, this zone right here. Let's adjust this. That was my exit. And I'm happy with it, right? There's no reason not to be. 550 pip run up, that's not anything to sneeze at. And, no reason to sit there wishing I had held for any longer portion of this trade. So just a quick explanation of my reason for entry and exit. I hope that helps clear some things up, and helps just give a brief little insight into the way that my mind works, which, if I'm honest, can be a scary place, but hopefully that helps in some capacity.